Blood and power, these ruthless twin forces defined Henry VIII's life and marked his terrifying final days. In the bitter winter of 1547, England's most infamous monarch lay entombed inside his own decaying flesh, a swollen, reeking prison that mocked the very strength he once brandished like a sword. Behind the gilded walls of Whitehall Palace, candle light flickered across tapestries as courtiers tiptoed through silence, whispering what none dared say aloud. The lion is dying. Yet even as the shadows lengthened and death coiled closer, Henry's cruelty lingered like a cold breath. His paranoia sharpened like steel, his wrath unspent. This was no peaceful death. This was the slow, festering collapse of a king. Body, mind, and soul, unraveling under the weight of divine punishment, or perhaps the natural reckoning of a life built on conquest and bloodshed. Once known as the Golden Prince, admired across Europe for his towering physique and magnetic charm, Henry had become a grotesque parody of his youth. His legs, blistered with ulcers, oozed pus that stank so violently it choked the very air around him. Servants who once bowed in awe now clutched perfumed rags to their faces, barely able to endure the rot. His once commanding body had ballooned into a monstrous, immovable mass, requiring custom-made hoists just to lift him from his bed. His face, once the symbol of English might, was now a bloated mask of yellowed skin and sunken eyes, half man, half corpse, still ruling in shadows. The king's physicians, those supposed men of healing, were helpless, draining blood, burning herbs, muttering desperate prayers. But nothing could halt the torment that crawled through Henry's bones. Modern science, with all its cold clarity, now suspects the king was devoured by a gruesome blend of type 2 diabetes, chronic gout, and osteomyelitis, a bone infection so excruciating it likely drove him mad. Every movement was agony, every breath a curse, and within his mind, something darker stirred. As his flesh deteriorated, so too did his reason. Paranoia twisted around his thoughts like ivy choking a crumbling wall. Friends became threats, loyal servants became spies. Rage would erupt without warning, sudden and brutal, as if hell itself boiled beneath his skin. He barked commands that contradicted themselves, demanded executions with wild eyes, and spoke to ghosts no one else could see. It was not merely illness, it was collapse, and yet none could speak the truth. Because beneath the sickness, beneath the reek of death, Henry was still king, still the supreme head of the Church of England, still the man who had defied the Pope, who had rewritten the very laws of heaven and earth to satisfy his will. His reign had seen the dissolution of monasteries, the execution of queens, the betrayal of best friends, all in the name of power, of legacy, of God. But now, that same God seemed to have turned away. His throne, once a symbol of divine right, now resembled a throne of torment. He had broken with Rome to marry Anne Boleyn. He had slaughtered Thomas More in the name of truth. He had made England tremble with the swing of his axe. But in these final months, as his body liquefied from the inside out, no crown, no law, no doctrine could save him. By January of 1547, the king could no longer walk. His courtiers whispered behind velvet drapes, playing games of survival. His sixth wife, Catherine Parr, moved like a ghost through the palace halls, clever enough to survive where so many others had perished, watching her monstrous husband dissolve into sickness. Henry's sleep was broken by fits of screaming, by visions, by the memory of those he'd condemned. They say the dead returned in those nights. Anne Boleyn with her severed neck, Jane Seymour with her haunted eyes, Thomas Cromwell, Cardinal Wolsey, the ghost of Thomas More, silently watching. Guilt, long buried beneath layers of indulgence and tyranny, rose like a tide. But even death had to wait. In his final acts, Henry showed the same merciless cunning that had defined his reign. He drew up a will so riddled with ambiguities and hidden agendas that it would plunge England into chaos after his death. He named a regency council for his 9-year-old son, Edward VI, but packed it with rival factions, each desperate to claim dominance. It was a final game, a last snarl from a dying beast, and when death finally came, it was no glorious passing. His body, bloated and split with infection, began to rot before the breath had even left him. The royal embalmers were overwhelmed. The coffin, sealed in haste, began to leak, a grotesque mix of blood, pus, and fluid that seeped onto the stone floor beneath. And then came the dogs. According to chroniclers, stray animals lapped at the ooze, an image so revolting that it spread across Europe like a curse. Divine justice, they whispered, God's retribution for a king who had defied church and conscience alike. This was not just a death, it was the disintegration of a symbol, the destruction of a man once thought invincible, and in that decay lay something far more terrifying than murder or war. Because Henry VIII had ruled with an iron will, forging a nation in his image, but in the end, his flesh failed him, his mind betrayed him, and his legacy, so carefully crafted through terror and reform, was stained by the stench of rot. This was the man who had stood at the center of Europe's most seismic religious upheaval, who had shattered centuries of tradition to forge his own path, and yet, in death, he could not even keep his body sealed. It burst, it spilled, it leaked into the ground and became legend. But legend, too, can rot. Had once been called the defender of the faith. By the end, even that title rang hollow. The court kept its silence, of course, draped in black, heads bowed, mouthing words of respect. But behind the ceremony, behind the velvet, a darker truth lingered. This was the final chapter of a life ruled not by grace or greatness but by fear. A life weighed down by its own sins. And though the chronicles of kings may soften the facts, though monuments may rise in stone and gold, history remembers the scent, the wound, the dogs. This is not a tale meant to comfort. It is a warning, etched in ulcers, whispered in death rattles, and written in blood. The fall of Henry VIII is not a page in a textbook. It is a slow-motion scream from the past, echoing through time, reminding us that no matter how mighty the throne, flesh will fail. And when it does, what remains is not majesty, but the truth. He was dead, but his shadow had only begun to spread. As the bells tolled over Whitehall and the velvet-covered coffin creaked through the frost-bitten roads toward Windsor, England found itself not in mourning, but in silent calculation. Power had left its monstrous vessel, and now it hung in the air like smoke, ready to be inhaled by those hungry enough to seize it. Henry VIII, tyrant of thrones, breaker of churches, devourer of wives, had left behind more than just a corpse bloated with rot and royal secrets. He had left behind a 9-year-old boy, trembling beneath a crown too heavy for his fragile skull. Edward VI, the son of promise, born of Jane Seymour's bloody sacrifice, now stood as king in name. But behind the mask of childlike innocence, the vultures circled. For Henry's will, that infamous and cryptic legal maze, had sown chaos into the very soil of the realm. It named a regency council of 16, none with clear dominance, all sworn to act together, a noble lie that cracked the moment the king's body cooled. What followed was not peace, but a cold, elegant war of daggers, drawn beneath smiles. Edward Seymour, the boy king's uncle, moved fastest. He cast aside the fiction of equality, proclaiming himself Lord Protector of the realm. It was a title drenched in ambition, a coup wrapped in protocol. He ruled in Edward's name, but his voice was the law. And as England stumbled into the uncertain dawn of Protestant reform, the ghosts of Henry's reign began to rise. The monasteries had been gutted, their gold melted, their abbots hanged or broken. But the people, The common folk who lit candles in secret, who whispered Latin prayers over their children's graves, had not forgotten, and they did not forgive. Across the countryside, fields turned red not with harvest but with rebellion. In 1549, the Prayer Book Rebellion tore through the West Country, sparked by Edward's imposition of a new English liturgy. Latin was banned, altars destroyed. For the faithful, it was sacrilege. For the crown, it was progress. For the dying, it was treason. The rebels were crushed, butchered by mercenaries loyal to the new regime, and their bodies were left to rot as warnings in the sun. England was changing. But change, when forced through blood and fire, breeds only silence or resistance. In the shadows, Henry's youngest daughter watched. Elizabeth, quiet, calculating, unreadable, a child of scandal, born of the most infamous queen to ever wear the crown, Anne Boleyn. Her birth had shaken the realm, her mother's beheading stained the royal lineage with suspicion. Yet Elizabeth survived. She learned. She listened, and while her half-sister Mary burned with Catholic zeal and her brother Edward weakened under the weight of Protestant expectation, Elizabeth played the long game. Because if Henry's reign was defined by brutal assertion, Elizabeth's would be forged through cunning restraint. But that tale had yet to unfold. First came the slow, pitiful death of Edward VI, the boy king who ruled only on paper, wasting away from what modern medicine now suspects was tuberculosis. He coughed blood into silk sheets while his courtiers jostled for position, whispering promises of power into his fading ears. Desperate to protect the Protestant faith, Edward signed a last-minute alteration to the succession, disinheriting both Mary and Elizabeth in favor of Lady Jane Grey, his cousin. A 16-year-old girl caught in a trap of ambition, not her own. It was a cruel move, orchestrated by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, a man who saw Jane not as a monarch but as a puppet. For 9 days, Lady Jane sat on the throne, her reign nothing more than a political hallucination. When Mary Tudor, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, marched with a loyal army and the roaring support of a Catholic nation, Jane was abandoned, betrayed by those who had crowned her. Mary took the throne, and Jane was sent to the Tower, her fate already sealed. She was a girl who loved books, not bloodshed. Yet she died by the axe, trembling in prayer, blindfolded and weeping, as the executioner struggled to strike cleanly. England had witnessed another child sacrificed on the altar of power, and now Mary, once humiliated by her father's cruel divorces, now risen from the ashes of disgrace, would take her revenge. Not on her enemies, but on an entire family. She earned her name in fire, Bloody Mary, a queen who believed she was the instrument of divine justice, sent to cleanse England of heresy. The flames of Smithfield became her gospel. Hundreds were burned alive, men, women, elderly priests, pregnant wives, condemned for refusing to recant Protestantism. The smoke rose over London like incense for the dead, and in the crackling heat the people began to dread her name. Even those who once cheered her coronation now muttered behind closed doors. Her marriage to Philip of Spain, a foreign Catholic prince, only deepened the mistrust. She dreamed of a Catholic heir, a child to restore what her father had broken, but her womb betrayed her. A phantom pregnancy, swelling without life. Her belly grew, her breasts ached, but there was no child. Only gas, tumors, and heartbreak. And when she realized the truth, it was not just her body that withered, but her will. She died in 1558, consumed by illness and grief, abandoned by her husband, unloved by her people. And once again the throne stood open, and through its heavy doors walked a woman no one had expected to survive. Elizabeth Tudor, the bastard princess, now the Virgin Queen. She inherited not just a kingdom, but a ruin. England was splintered, bleeding, paranoid, and yet from those ashes she would forge an empire. But her rule would be shaped not just by vision, but by the specter of her father. The memory of Henry VIII hung over every law, every alliance, every execution. He had taught his daughter not how to rule, but how to endure, how to bend without breaking, how to trust no one. She learned from his mistakes, wielding charm where he had used force, seduction where he had roared. But beneath the glitter of her court, beneath the poems and pearls, there pulsed a familiar chill. Torture chambers still echoed in the tower, spies listened in every tavern, and traitors still died in public agony, as if Henry's ghost demanded that the fires never truly be extinguished. But Elizabeth's story, and the dark games she played, would come later. For now, history looked back at Henry VIII's England, not as a golden age, but as a labyrinth of betrayal, disease, and death. His legacy was a paradox. He had united a fractured church, but shattered the nation's conscience. He had built the framework of modern monarchy, but ruled through fear and impulse. And in death, his body rotted just as his kingdom did, slowly, publicly, grotesquely. The wars of religion, the executions, the dynastic chaos, they were all his children. He had wanted to be remembered as a new King Arthur, a second Solomon, a mighty Caesar reborn. Instead, his memory carries the stench of decay, the cries of widows, the ashes of martyrs, and the broken bodies of his wives. And yet, we remember him. We tell his story, not because he was great, but because he reminds us what power does when it has no limit, what happens when a man becomes a god in his own eyes, when the law bends to a will corrupted by pride, when pain becomes policy and death becomes routine. Henry VIII did not just die. He bled into the soul of a nation, and centuries later, his ghost still whispers through the pages of history, warning, accusing, laughing. Riesling's the dust had settled, but the blood had not dried. Henry VIII was gone, buried beneath the cold stone of St. George's Chapel beside Jane Seymour, the only wife he claimed to have truly loved, though even that love had come soaked in blood. Yet death had not loosened his grip. His legacy moved like a shadow through the generations, whispering at the edges of every crown that followed. His daughter Elizabeth sat upon the throne now, robed in pageantry, draped in symbolism, adored by poets and feared by kings. But the truth behind the Virgin Queen's golden mask was far more complex, a reign haunted not only by threats foreign and domestic, but by the very memory of the father whose blood thundered in her veins. She ruled with brilliance, yes, but also with cold precision, a heart armored by trauma, and an instinct sharpened by danger. She had learned young that love was a weapon, that trust was deadly, and that survival in the Tudor court meant smiling while surrounded by knives. It was not just the specter of her father that loomed. It was the twisted web he left behind, tangled with secrets, suspicions, and silent atrocities. The Tower of London still bore the echo of screams. Beneath its ancient stones, priests had been flayed, poets had vanished, and queens had knelt to die. Some of those horrors had faded into legend, but others still pulsed in the collective memory of a nation that had witnessed its rulers kill not just enemies, but family. During Elizabeth's reign, the Tower remained an instrument of the state, though she used it with more restraint than her father. Torture was not abolished, it was refined. Whispered confessions, cold iron cuffs, dark rooms without end. For every spectacle she avoided, there was a secret disappearance. The Elizabethan age sparkled with culture, with plays and discovery, but beneath that golden surface, her court ran on fear. Quiet, calculated fear. One name came to define that fear: Mary, Queen of Scots, cousin to Elizabeth, granddaughter of Henry's sister, and to many Catholics the rightful heir to the English throne. She had been raised in France, groomed for glory, cloaked in beauty, and steeped in ambition. But her return to Scotland was a descent into nightmare. Her husbands died, her allies betrayed her, and by 1568 she fled across the border into England, seeking sanctuary from her cousin. What she found was a gilded prison. Elizabeth, ever cautious, ever watching, saw Mary not as family but as threat incarnate. For nearly 2 decades, Mary was kept in a maze of castles and manor houses, guarded, isolated, denied the throne she believed was hers. But the danger she posed was real. Catholic plots, funded from Rome and fueled by Spanish gold, bloomed in the shadows, each one naming Mary as queen in waiting, and eventually the pressure broke the crown's restraint. In 1586, the Babington plot was uncovered, a plan to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. The letters were damning, the evidence undeniable. Mary had reached too far, trusted too deeply, and sealed her fate. Elizabeth hesitated, tormented by the image of signing her cousin's death warrant, but the deed was done. In 1587, Mary was executed at Fotheringhay Castle. The blade took more than one stroke. Blood spilled across the floor. Her little dog crawled from beneath her skirts, whimpering in grief, and with that, another Tudor ghost was born. Another royal woman shattered in the name of order, another echo of Henry's legacy of execution. But this was not the end. It was only the storm before the flood, because in 1588, England faced annihilation. The Spanish Armada, the greatest fleet the world had ever seen, surged across the sea like a floating cathedral of vengeance. Philip II of Spain, and over Mary's death, determined to crush the heretic queen and restore Catholic rule to England. Elizabeth, now in her mid-50s, rode to Tilbury in armor, steel over silk, and delivered a speech so fierce it sent fire through the hearts of men. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman," she said, "but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too." Her father's daughter, in every sense. The Armada was defeated, not by sheer might, but by strategy, weather, and the chaos of divine wind. The threat was vanquished, and Elizabeth's myth was sealed. But even victory could not erase the rot beneath the crown. The Tudor dynasty was running out of blood. Elizabeth never married, never bore a child. The question of succession loomed like a sword over every parliament, every courtier's ambition. And as her health declined, so too did the unity of her court. Spies turned on spies, ambitious nobles plotted and counterplotted, reading every glance and gesture like omens. Elizabeth, once radiant with youth, now painted her face in white lead to hide the marks of time. Her teeth blackened, her hair thinned, her temper flared. She spent her final days pacing the palace in restless despair, standing for hours in silent fury, refusing food, refusing rest, haunted not by illness, but by memory. She saw them all in her mind's eye. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, falsely promised a crown and delivered to the axe. Her cousin Mary, sentenced with ink and silence, her own image, once beloved, now a hollow mask. And through it all, behind every echo, the ghost of Henry, his voice, his fury, his legacy. Elizabeth died in 1603, alone, seated on cushions on the floor of her chamber, refusing to go to bed, as if sleep itself might betray her. She had ruled for 44 years, longer than any English monarch before her, and with her died the House of Tudor. The throne passed to James VI of Scotland, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland under a new dynasty. But the Tudors never truly left. Their story remained carved into the soul of the nation. Their rise and fall was not merely a tale of kings and queens. It was a chronicle of flesh, ambition, pain, and myth. They redefined monarchy, turned marriage into diplomacy, religion into a weapon, and blood into policy. And though they are gone, their sins echo still. In every royal scandal, every whispered rumor, every locked door of the Tower, the ghost of Henry VIII lingers. Not because he was great, but because he showed us how close power lies to madness, how easily a golden crown can become a chain, and how history, once drenched in blood, never truly washes clean. The Tudors remind us that behind every legend is a body, and behind every body, a reckoning. They were born in battle, ruled in fire, and died in shadows. But their story remains, whispered in cathedrals, etched in stone, buried beneath palaces. Ready?